life goes up and life goes down. Jason believes that pain makes us tougher, stronger, more innovative. And a few weeks back, I had the pleasure of being in an innovation network for the food tech. Food is big. We have an entire area dedicated to food tech alone. And one of the participants told me, just like today, we're a pretty innovative crowd. This was like, R&D, innovation officers, myself included. I am surrounded by startups every single day. We feel relatively innovative. I assume that you guys feel at least relatively innovative. And then he asked me one question. And this question I'm going to ask you. What have you eaten? What 7 dishes have you eaten for the past month? If you kind of think back, what do you eat at home, by the table, with your dinner, your cat, or whomever your significant other is? And then he told me some stats saying that majority of us, very innovative people, actually eat the same 7 dishes over and over again. This is what we cook over and over again. We have the same 7 go-to recipes. Not very innovative. So I hope that Jason's very personal story can teach us to be more innovative. It's called Adversity is Your Strength, How Struggle Sharpens Your Ability to Innovate. Please welcome Jason from Oracle on stage. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see everybody. I'm from North Carolina, Southeast United States, so I'll greet you the way we greet people there, which is, hey y'all, how you doing? Now, I want to kind of just tell a little bit of a personal story on struggle and adversity, and I want to tell you a little bit first why. I think we come from an age and a culture where we tend to over-celebrate the wins in our lives, right? That's what, on Instagram, it's just like, oh my gosh, he's amazing, she's amazing, right? We see it on Facebook, we see it all over the place. We tend to minimize or not speak of our struggles. We're attracted to comfort, we're attracted to the happy path. But I want to just give you an idea and put forth this notion that says adversity is a good thing. It's something that we actually want to embrace because it's often the source of a ton of creativity and a ton of solutions. So kind of the 3 big ideas I want to give you is adversity is something that is good and necessary for creativity and innovation. The second thing I want to tell you is that adversity reveals and refines our character. And the third thing, and this one's maybe a little bit harder to do, you need to be intentional about this, but you need to embrace adversity with joy. And that kind of sounds really weird, but I'll explain that why. So those are the 3 things I want you to think about. A little bit about my story. So yeah, I am an Oracle guy. I'm actually not going to come up here and talk about Oracle stuff, which you're probably like, oh, good. I will tell you a little bit about what we do at the end, because we do love and care about startups, and my story has a lot to do with startups. And now for me, adversity was something that, I didn't really face much of until I was a younger man. I was a United States Marine. And so there, you're kind of trained to not run from adversity, but you look for it and you run towards it, right? But that was kind of my choice and my job. But it was when I did my first startup is when something happened to me and my family that was really, really hard and really defined kind of my character. So I have 4 children, and my oldest, who's 18 now. In fact, let me show you a picture of her when this story begins. It's a really cool picture. Okay, so my oldest is 18 now, and she has something called spina bifida. Has anybody ever heard of that? No? Okay, it's similar to as if you broke your back, but it's a birth defect. So it's one of the most commonly occurring birth defects in the United States. And this was a picture of her at 20 weeks gestation. So that's 20 weeks after she was conceived. And so we found out, we were 20-nothing years old. If any of you have kids, you can appreciate this. We were 20-nothing years old, and find out that we're about to have our first child. That's such great news, right? And then we get this really hard news, which is your child that you've been hoping for and wanting for has a problem. And wow, that's really hard to swallow. And so in the course of that experience, we realized that there was an experimental treatment for kids with spina bifida. So what happens with spina bifida is, before the woman even knows she's pregnant, the neural tube, which is the sheets of protective tissue that goes around the spinal cord, doesn't properly finish, doesn't form correctly. And so they basically have a hole in their back, and that spinal cord comes outside of their body, and they have broken, just like they broke their back. And so we had just happened to hear of an experimental surgery from somebody that went through this in Atlanta. And at the time, we were in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where we live now. And thought, okay, wow, maybe we can do something about this. There was an experiment, and that's why I have this picture here. There was an experiment where they actually opened the womb, delivered the uterus, cut it open, drained all the fluid, took the child partway out. This is, the baby is the size of a can of Coke, by the way, and then did the repair of surgery. The theory was that third trimester fluid is very harsh, and it's that fluid that is damaging the spinal cord and creating mobility problems with these children, cognitive problems because their brain is sucked back into their neck. It's called Chiari. And so they thought, wow, what if we put all the spinal cord back into the child before that third trimester fluid is there to damage it? Maybe these kids can walk. So as you can imagine, this was a really tough decision for us, because in medicine, which you've heard some great health tech here today, but in medicine, when you want to go get a treatment and somebody tells you there's a X% chance that this drug or this treatment will work, well, the reason why they have that number is because there's lots and lots of case studies. Well, at this point, there's no case studies. So you just have to kind of go with it, and you have to decide, is this going to be a good choice or not? And so in our lives, this was our first struggle that we had that wasn't directly related to somebody's behavior, right? Like, oh, I'm an idiot, I caused some trouble, or something like that, right? Like none of us asked for this. And this all happened to happen when I was launching my first company, which is a residential construction software firm for high-end construction in the US. And so we go through this process, and wow, it's really hard. We had to fly to another city and spend a couple weeks at this hospital, and Susan, my wife, went through this surgery, and it was incredibly successful, fortunately for Anna. So she was born 18 years ago. I can't believe this. This sounds crazy today, but you can imagine almost 20 years ago how crazy that sounds even then. And so now we have this situation where, wow, there's this child with special needs, and your whole kind of perspective changes, right? And so we go through this notion of struggle and adversity, and we realize that we're exposed to some very interesting things as a founder and a problem solver and a person, right? If you've ever been through something difficult and been reflective on that difficulty, you realize that there's a lot of benefits that you get from that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So for example, with Anna, she's different. She's abled differently. Our family has to do things differently. We have to solve problems differently. And then you realize, wow, that difference opens up a whole new world on how I can solve problems on her behalf, how she solves problems for her that I can't do. And then taking that into the workplace, that gives you a different perspective on how do you hire people. You already have a preconceived notion on how a problem needs to get solved. But now, for me, it was greatly challenged. Does that make sense? So fast forward just a little bit. So she's doing fine. She still has her struggles, but that's a part of life when you're able differently. I'm going through my startup, and it was great, and I moved on to do some other things. And fast forward to about 3 years ago, maybe. So 3 years ago, Anna had, she absolutely loves sports. And I live in a part of the United States where basketball is religion. It's like going to church. And so she loved to play basketball. I was her coach, her high school basketball coach, and it was just her passion. And it was amazing and a learning experience for me to watch her do that because she's paralyzed below the knees. So she doesn't have any use of her ankles or calves, but she's my point guard on the basketball team. So she can run, she can jump. She does it through just pure will. And she sees hard things and pushes through. Even if it hurts, she wants the game more. And she realizes that the pain is worth the joy of playing the game. Like, that was a pretty good lesson for me. Like, as a founder, you're going to have hard things. And if your goals is to have this business be whatever it is you've envisioned, then the pain is always going to be worth the end game. Like, man, that's so cool that this like 13-year-old girl is teaching me these things. Now, she hit a roadblock though. And this was another interesting learning for our family. She had a catastrophic ankle injury. So her ankle and her left leg just was totally destroyed. And for 3 years, she wasn't walking at all. So she's immobile. And it was very difficult for her, who is an athlete, who's persevering through things that are really hard, and then she gets the thing that she loves the most, which is to run and play basketball, taken away from her. And so as parents, our job was to say, well, what are we going to do to figure this out? How are we going to solve this problem? We've traveled all over the United States to find doctors to help figure out what to do with this ankle bone that was totally destroyed. Maybe we can get an ankle replacement. Maybe we could do one thing or another. And every doctor we were talking to said, you probably need to amputate the leg. And so, well, that's a big decision to make. So I learned another thing from Anna about adversity and perseverance and refinement of character. I was like, Anna, she's about 13, she's about 14 years old at the time, maybe 15. It goes fast. Like, honey, I can't make that decision for you, whether to amputate or not. This is she's growing and has to own her medical treatment. She has to be a part of this decision. I don't get to put this leg back on later if she changes her mind. So I'm like, Anna, you have to make this decision. Let's process that through together. And so what I learned, and her response to me was great. She's like, Dad, I don't want to lose my leg, but I want to run, and I want to play. I want to get back up, and I want to be active. So let's take it if I need to take it. And so that was a very mature response from a kid who's 14 years old, 15 years old. And so what I learned from that, going back to one of the 3 points, is that adversity revealed her character, which is like pretty solid, and then also refines it. So I know that every moment in her life wasn't this wonderful mountaintop. She's living in valleys. We use that term a lot, like mountaintops and valleys. So that was something I learned from her. So we then, it was another interesting learning we had. I mentioned I have 4 kids. We do a lot together. And we did one of our doctor's appointments together. So we had 4 kids, my wife and I, with one of the doctors at Johns Hopkins University, which is a wonderful hospital and university in Maryland. And we were getting some really tough news. Like, nope, she's either gonna not walk ever again or you need to take her leg. And then what I watched was how my son, who now is 15, at the time he was 13, how he responded. So he starts pressing the doctor, my 13-year-old boy. He's like, you know what you could do? You could create a frame. And then he starts like engineering technology that doesn't exist yet, right? And it was really neat to see his response to help his sister, right? So not only does adversity in our own life refine and reveal character, but when you do it in community with others, right, they can share that with you and then also drive change and innovation. Can Patrick invent something to reshape her ankle? Not at age 13. But he is continuing to fuel his love of engineering, and he sees what's going on with his sister. And what we realize, even with fetal surgery, what we realize is that struggle And adversity often comes up with solutions that no one would ever thought was possible, right? So if you would have told me when I got married at age whatever, 19, 20, whatever it was, hey, you're going to have some trouble. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to crack open your wife and operate on your unborn child open. Like, that's insane. There's no way you're going to do that. Who would even think to do that, right? So it's amazing as you guys are facing challenges in your technology, in your startup, or in the problems that you're trying to solve, if the idea seems crazy, you might be onto something. You might be onto something. I'll tell you the other thing that it teaches you is persistence and perseverance. So we came out of that meeting, and it was hard. It was hard, because we're hearing the same thing, and man, I just want something different for her. And I made a joke. I don't know if you guys follow American football. You probably do not. But I said if this were Cam Newton, they'd be trying a lot harder. Cam Newton is the quarterback for the American football team that's in my state. Like, if this were Cam Newton, they sure would try harder. My wife was like, yes, they would. So guess what she does? She tracks down Cam Newton's doctor. And this is the guy that did ankle surgery on Derek Jeter, on Kevin Durant, all the big, great names in all the sports in the United States. And she persists and wears down this medical team, and we get an appointment at Christmas, the week before Christmas. That's just not heard of. And so again, that adversity in our lives produced a perseverance that led us to an answer that wasn't amputation. So I'll fast forward now. So Anna's about to go to university. She's not been without struggle. It's not been a rainbows every day. But, and this is my third point here, is that, in fact, let me bring this up. She embraces these challenges with joy. So I'm going to paraphrase something from the Christian tradition, but it actually makes a lot of sense to all of us. And I want you to look at this picture for a second, right? I had a friend tell me this story just this weekend. He was like, man, we look at the mountain. That's where we want to be, right? We want to be at the mountaintop. We want our companies to be successful. But guess what? Life can't sustain up there. Life doesn't sustain at the top of the mountain. There's food and nourishment in the valley. So when you're in the valley, which is that time of hardness, kind of embrace that. Be okay with that. We live in this world of real and ideal, right? And there's a tension between those two things. And so as soon as you acknowledge that that tension is a thing, right, and embrace that, then you'll be able to get there. So let me tell you, so when we say this, let's count it happiness when you face adversity. Because what happens is, and you saw this with my wife, you saw this with my daughter, is that it produces a perseverance that when it's done, you have this maturity. You have this maturity as an entrepreneur, you have this maturity as a person so that you can prepare for the next thing. So, I'm going to give you all some homework, all right? I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. So when I learned this a little while ago, when I go sit down and I listen to a talk that I'm like, yeah, I'm tracking with you. I think I like that. If I don't do anything about it within a day or two, nothing happens in my life. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a challenge. There's probably one or two of you that are like, your company's about to go under. You wish you had some money. You don't know where it's coming from. You're in the valley right now, right? So what I want you to do is, or you've been through one. So what I want you to do is write down, spend some time and write down and reflect on a challenge you have. Writing is thinking. It makes you slow down. It makes you stop. It makes you be reflective. And then what I want you to do is draw out some of those things, how it's shaped your character, what you've learned from it, and what you can use on the next valley, because it's coming. So I will stop there and give you my Oracle slide, because I know that's why all of you guys came. We do have a startup ecosystem that is global. You can find out about it here. I think I had my Twitter on the very first one, so hit me up. I'd love to hear more about your stories, and I'm grateful for the time that you gave me today. All right.